So I had a lot of questions on my tails and how I made them, and it's a little complicated to just kind of understand what I did using, well, just through text. So I told a couple people I'd make a video to explain it, and maybe for anybody else who is looking to make a pair of tails for, I guess, Ahri or whatever reasons, you can use this video to help too. Basically what I did was I took two belts, and one's a three-prong belt, one's a two-prong belt, and what happened was, at first I only had this belt, and I coiled the wire through each of the loops, and I was using that to try to make the tails stand up. But what happened was the belt would be here and the wire would be out, and then the tails would fall to the side because there was no balance to it. So I went ahead and added another belt to the bottom, and adding the other belt, and then taking the excess wire, because when you cut your wire, you're going to want about that much extra to coil the wire and then wrap it around the belts. And once you have all the wire coiled and wrapped, what I did was I coiled the wire I put into the tails into a corkscrew, and that helps with just holding the shape of the tails, so you don't have to use too much stuffing. But after a while that will start to come undone when you're bending the tails, because until you figure out what way the tails bend to work for you, they're going to come down a little. And one of the most important things that you're going to have to do is, well, first of all, the wire should be kind of around your stomach, like waist area, because, well, the belt should, because if they're not there, this won't be able to rest on your butt. As you can see, it's more flat, and that resting on my butt also had like a big thing to do with the tail standing up. And the tails have to come out from the bottom, not the top, because then they'll just keep falling down, which was two big problems I ran into. And once you get the wires on corkscrew, and I just lightly corkscrew them, I take my arm and then I pull the corkscrew out. I put these little orange wire connectors on, and what those did for me was it keeps it from piercing through the tail, and also really importantly, it keeps it, so if it were to pierce through the tail and you didn't realize and some little kid walked by, it would hit them right eye, and that's really not a good thing. So that's super important to have. But yeah, after doing all that and having the wires attached to the belt and connected, because I already had my tail sewn up, and what I did is I cut out kind of like a rounded obelisk about this big, and then I made the fur parts face each other and I just sewed around it, leaving an opening at the bottom so I could stuff it. It's pretty easy. That takes about 30 minutes to do all 9 tails. But yeah, I stuffed out each tail, and then I attached them to the belt and the wires, and then I safety pinned them. I mean, if you get belts that are made out of fabric, which after doing this I would really suggest, because the safety pins will come undone. Excuse me. And without the safety pins on, and it holding the tails to the belt like that, they're gonna fall off. And I went to school on Halloween with it because I could wear our costumes, and it was to my tails, but the safety pins came undone and I lost them and they kept falling off. Thank goodness it was a half day, but it was terrible. And also another thing is you will have some wires poking towards your butt, just like from rounding it out. I tuck the really long ones into the tails, and then the ones that are too short to tuck into the tails, I just cap off with wire connectors, because they're going to stab you. And when I was putting the tails together, I actually almost started bleeding because I was trying to form them and put them on, which that kind of sucked. But yeah, they're actually pretty easy to make. If you saw the video, they move while you walk, and it's just like the slightest bit of motion will make them wave, which I think is really cool, because you can just stand there and like kind of like shake your hips and like they move. And I'm pretty short, so when people walk by, they didn't really see it because my tails obviously they're already way below eye level. So it was kind of funny because they'd bump into the tails and they'd be kind of surprised. And so yeah, bringing that up, you're really going to want somebody standing with you, or like bring a friend or someone to help adjust your tails, because if you're in a crowded place, or if you don't understand how to like get them adjusted, they're going to fall down. And also, you do not adjust them at the bottom, you adjust them at the center to the top, and you just push the bottom up a little, because the bottom's going to be resting on your butt. And if you're pushing the bottoms up, it's just going to keep falling down, because that's the weakest part, and that's holding most of the weight of your tail. So you bend them from about the center, maybe a little lower, and you bend that up, and that's how you hold the shape of the tails. And once you find kind of like the sweet spot that holds everything, keeps from falling apart, I walked around the con today for a good 4 hours without really having to adjust anything. I mean, some of the tails on the side that were kind of coming out here, I had to have my friend fix, but it was only because people were like running into me because it was super crowded and we had like walkways like this big. So I mean, that's inevitable almost. But yeah, for the project, the setup is pretty cheap. I used 2 old belts I had. It's probably going to be more expensive if you buy belts, but you can get them at Goodwill or something. So that's super cheap. And then the 10 gauge wire. By the way, there's 2 types of wires. There's one that's bendable and it'll hold shape, and then there's one that is, I think it's called stranded, but I'm not sure. And it's just like bendable, and it's just like string. You want to get obviously ones that hold shape. And the wire connectors come at Home Depot. And what I did, it came in this big coil with 3 wires per coil. It was like a 15-foot coil. And I just took a knife, I slit, because it was in a binding. I slit the binding, I ripped it off, and it had 3 sets of wires. And so I had about 45 feet of wiring. So it was pretty nice. More than enough. I still have leftovers, so like, it was $12 I think for the wiring, $1.50 for the little package of wire connectors, and then the most expensive part was the tails, which was $80 for the fabric for all of them, which I'm sure you could find it cheaper at other places, but yeah, it was probably the most expensive part fabric wise in my costume, but I was really happy with how it turned out, because it honestly isn't something that you see a lot, and I got a lot of compliments on it, and I was happy with how everything turned out. And it's a little bit different than what everyone else does. And it's something that seems really complicated, but it's super easy to make. And I love wearing them. I think they're fun. They're pretty light for how they look. I mean, after a while your back's going to start hurting, but I mean, that's almost inevitable. But yeah. So I know a few people asked me to make the video to kind of explain it in detail and like show how to make it. So that's really it. And it's easy, simple, and I'd make a tutorial video, but I'd have to take the tails completely apart and then redo them, or buy new stuff, and I don't have like the materials to do that right now. So that's basically explaining it with kind of showing it. But yeah, they turn out nice. You can see where kind of like the safety pins aren't coming loose. But yeah, if you could get fabric belts, I'd definitely do that, because you could just sew it in. But yeah.